All right, so again, how banks make money. How do they make profit? We'll talk about making money in that sense. Then we're actually going to look at how a deposit creates money in the banking system. In other words, if Steffi deposits $100 in the bank, it actually results in more than $100 in spending power in the banking system. Okay? So let's first talk about making profits. All right, here's the bank. And we'll say this is Eric. Eric just hit the lottery, won $1 million. He has the big check, he's going to go deposit it. Okay? And this is Steffi. When Eric puts that $100 in the bank, what's that called? It's called a deposit. He's just become a depositor. Now, what does he get in return for his deposit? He's going to get paid some sort of interest by the bank. They're going to pay him interest in return. Well, let's say a chunk of that $1 million is going to be borrowed by Steffi. She's going to borrow some money to buy herself a new sports car. Okay? Let's say she's borrowing $100,000 of that $1 million to buy this souped up sports car. Does she just have to pay back the $100,000 she borrows?
No.
She has to pay more. What's the $100,000 she borrowed called? The initial amount of a loan. Principal. It's called the principal. And on top of the principal, she's going to have to pay her own interest. So she's going to pay the principal and interest back to the bank. How does the bank make a profit off of this type of business arrangement?
Just the interest that Steffi pays back to the bank is larger than the interest that the bank pays you.
Okay, excellent. The way banks make money in its most simple form is that the banks are going to charge their borrowers. They're going to charge Steffi a higher rate of interest than they pay their depositors, than they'll pay Eric. That's the simplest way to explain how a bank makes money. They're going to pay Eric 4%. They're going to charge Steffi 8%. Banks make money by charging their borrowers a higher rate of difference than they pay their depositors. And the difference between those interest rates is sometimes called the spread. The difference between what a bank is paying its depositors and charging its borrowers. Now, do they always loan it out to a person? Not necessarily. They can loan it to a business. They are permitted in some circumstances to invest that money in certain types of stocks or mutual funds or money market funds or bonds. But the basic premise is the same. Get a higher rate of return by percentage than what you pay those depositors who put money in your bank. So whatever the bank is doing with that money, whether they're loaning it out, investing it in some commodity, whatever, they need to earn a higher percentage return on their investment, what they do with the money, than what they're paying their depositors. That's how a bank makes money. Does that kind of simplify things for you, Bill? We talked about that when you came in?
Yeah.
And it works individually too. When you talk about making money with money, if you're going to borrow the money from someone, from some investor or some bank, and you're an individual investor, whatever you put your money into has to pay you a higher rate of return than whatever you borrowed the money at. If you borrowed the money at 6%, well, you better be making 10, 12% on whatever your investment is, whether it's a stock, a bond, some kind of commodity, money market, whatever. Okay? That's how banks make a profit. Now, we also want to look at how banks create money in the banking system, seemingly from thin air. So, let's say you have a $100 bill in your hand. That $100 bill to you is an asset, and it's a liability to the Fed, okay? So you take your $100, the bank's liabilities increase by the amount of that deposit. In this case, $100. Now what we're going to look at here is how that $100 is going to create more than $100 in the banking system. So let's say Jimmy puts $100 in the bank. how much of that can he spend, can he write checks for? He can write checks for $100, okay? There's $100 in the banking system. Well, let's say the reserve requirement, remember we talked about this last week? This was one of the fixes that they came up with after the bank failures of the Great Depression, requiring banks to keep a certain amount of money on reserve. Let's say the bank has to keep 10% of Jimmy's money on reserve. They can't loan out the entire 100. They can only loan out 90. So let's say they loan out $90. Well, whoever got that money, how much can they spend? They can spend 90. How much can Jimmy write checks for? 100. His 100 is already worth $190. It's already created 90 additional dollars. So let's say the borrower spends that 90 and the store owner deposits $90 in the bank. So now we have $90 deposited in the bank. How much can the store owner write checks for? Store owner can write checks for that 90. So Jimmy's $100 deposit now is $190 in the banking system. How much of that can the bank loan out?
81.
They can loan out 81 to somebody else. And let's say that 81 finds its way back in the bank. Now how much is created in the banking system? $271 has been created. And we can extend that, so on and so forth. The bank keeps loaning out 90%, and that finds its way back in the bank. How much can they loan out? Now, have I said anything about anyone holding money in their pocket? Not putting it all in the bank, but keeping a little cash in their pockets? Would you expect that to cause more money in the banking system or less money in the banking system if we keep some under a mattress or in our pocket? So we're going to look at the formula for what we call the money multiplier. The money multiplier is what we will use to determine how much money will be created in the banking system by any deposit. We'll simply take the amount of the deposit and multiply it by the money multiplier. So there are two things that are going to impact the money multiplier. One, how much is the reserve ratio? How much are banks required to keep on hand? The more they have to keep on hand, the smaller the multiplier is going to be because they can't loan as much out. Two, how much cash do we keep in our pockets? Do we put all the money in the bank when we make a deposit, or do we keep some cash in our pockets? Those two things will impact how much money can be created with a deposit. So for the money multiplier, our equation is 1 divided by R plus C. R is the reserve requirement, or the reserve ratio, and C is the ratio of cash to deposits. In other words, if for every $100 people deposit, they keep 20 in cash, then C would be 0.2. We state these both as decimals. So let's say this, let's keep the math really easy. Let's say the reserve requirement is 10%, and for every $100 people put in the bank, they keep $10 in their pocket. How much would Jimmy's initial $100 deposit create in the banking system? Reserve requirement is 10%. For every $100 we put in the bank, we keep 10 in our pocket. How much does Jimmy's $100 deposit create in the banking system? 1 divided by, what's the reserve requirement? 10%. So how do we state that in decimal form? 0.1. People hold 10 of every $100 that they deposit in cash. What would that number be? 0.1. So 1 divided by 0.1 plus 0.1 is 1 divided by 0.2.
It's 5.
It's 5. So our money multiplier is 5. So Jimmy's $100 deposit creates $500 in the banking system. Okay? You just take the amount of the deposit and you multiply it by 1 divided by R plus C. On the test, I'll keep it really simple like that. It'll be 1 divided by 0.2, or I'll make R plus C equal 0.4 or 0.5, something that makes it really easy. Just understand how to use it. Make sense? Okay. So that covers the creation of money in the banking system. And that's really how banks make money in 15 minutes or less.